Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Abram Kielsmeyer-Jones, and this is Mark Translation Notes. We're in Mark 14:10 through 21, this 12-verse passage where Jesus begins to be betrayed. That process is set in motion, and he predicts it at the meal that he has with his disciples. Today, we expect to finish this particular passage with part 3 of 3. Welcome and thanks for being here. Just a little bit of housekeeping to make sure we're all ready to go. This handout that you can see on my screen that I'm sharing with you is available to you in the GoToWebinar control panel. That panel pops up as soon as you log in, and there's a handout section. You can make sure that triangle next to it is pointed down. It will open up this handout. We'll also email this to you with a recording of today's session. So we are recording, and you'll get the handout in an email if you're registered and here live. And if you're watching on the recording looking for the handout, two ways you can get it. One, you can go to tinyurl.com/Mark Translation Notes. That will take you to a shared Google Drive folder where I've got all of the handouts for Mark Translation Notes. And you can also email me, abramkj@accordancebible.com. Our focus is on translation, in particular, looking at the lexical questions that come up when we translate from Greek to English. So what does this word mean? How has Mark used it before? Especially, what does this word mean in this context when it could mean something different in a different context? We've got a good example of that actually with the word betray. So we ask those lexical questions and try to clarify as much as we can. We also look at grammatical questions. So why is this word inflected this way here? Why are the words in this particular order? What's Mark doing with this construction here? And my goal is always to be as faithful as possible to the Greek and also readable in the target language. And it's often possible to do both very well. Sometimes we see that there's a potential tension there, or at least a challenge to preserve the Greek and have it be readable in English. And in part, that's just because no two languages are identical to each other and have different features. And so there will be not always the exact same grammatical construction across every language. So we might have to ask, well, how do I do this in English? So those are the kinds of questions that we look at. I welcome questions and comments. To do that, there's a one-way typed chat. It's the questions box. Just click so that shows open. You can type your questions to me. I'll either respond individually or anonymously share your question or comment with the group and respond that way. Let's review Mark 14:12 through 16. So this was last time. It was 2 weeks ago that we looked at this. Now on the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was sacrificed, Jesus' disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat the Passover meal?" So he sent 2 of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man carrying a jar of water will meet you. Follow him, and wherever he goes into, or wherever he goes, if you don't like the dangling preposition, wherever he enters, say to the owner of that house, the teacher says, 'Where is my guest room where I can eat the Passover meal with my disciples?' Then he will show you a large upstairs room furnished and ready. Make preparations for us there." So the disciples left and went into the city, and they found everything. I think the Greek is they found it, or they found everything just as Jesus had told them, and they prepared for the Passover meal. You'll see here with these parentheses, or sometimes I'll use brackets, that Greek does not always specify either the referent. It uses he a lot more than we might use Jesus more often. It'll go a longer time with just he in Mark. And then also sometimes direct objects don't get specified. And that's an example of what I was talking about earlier, where no two languages are alike and there just are differences. So if you were to say, I'm going to render the Greek exactly into English, you could do that, but you would find some gaps and need to think about what to do with that in translation. So let's just, as we warm up for verse 17, let's go back to verse 16 and see what we had going on there. I'm gonna make my font bigger. There's a little shortcut right here, the font size here. Okay, and they found just as he said. So there's not even an unspecified pronoun here. It's just, and the disciples went. They went out. They went into the city, and they found just as he said to them, and they prepared the Passover, or they prepared the meal. So good example there, no direct object, but clearly they found something. It would not make sense in English to say they found just as Jesus said, and so the NASB does this. It'll put it in italics if it's not actually in the Greek. I'll use parentheses. Some other languages may do that too. You can think about how you want to do that. But we see that again in verse 17, which is where we start our new material today. So let's look at that. I'll follow the handout, but also pull it up in accordance. This is the text we aim to cover today, finishes this passage. So let's start with just verse 17. Kai opsias genamenes erchetai metaton dodeka. So going left to right, it will be something like and, or now, or then. Evening, becoming, he came. So we've got present, well, he comes, present middle indicative, but because it's narrative describing something in the past, we render that as he came or went with the 12, metaton dodeka. And I've translated it this way. Now, when evening came, he went to the room with the 12. Now, this I think is a good example of somewhere where you don't need to pull out the object. You could just say he went with the 12, and that would make sense. Whereas they found just as Jesus had told them. That doesn't make as much sense stylistically in English. But you'll find that a lot of translations clarify this just so that the reader knows where he's going. So when evening came, or now when evening came, he went to the room with the 12. And I translate Kai with now for a new scene. Let me just close this sidebar here. We don't need to see that. Okay, now for a new scene. And then after that, we have opsias genamenes. And you can see this in the endings here, but also in the instant details if you need. Feminine singular genitive. So there's a noun here. And then aorist middle participle, feminine singular genitive. So it matches, and I've put those parsings in your handout, but it's a noun followed by a participle. They are both feminine singular, so they match in gender and number, and they match in case, genitive. And that's to be expected. We might ask the question, what is a genitive doing here? And the answer is, this is a genitive absolute, which is essentially a noun and participle in conjunction with each other in the genitive that provides some information about what's happening, but it's not necessarily grammatically connected to the rest of the sentence. So often when you see a genitive, there's maybe like a nominative that it's subordinate to or something like that. With the genitive absolute, not so. It stands alone. You'll see that in your diagrams if you open up add parallel diagram, Greek New Testament diagram. It shows you, it connects this to the verb because it does modify the verb. This serves like an adverbial function, but grammatically, the diagrams put genitive absolutes in brackets because it's not a genitive that modifies a nominative or something like that. So that's what we've got here. We've seen it in Mark before. We'll see it again. And the way you translate a genitive absolute often is with when. So when evening came. Some translations have in the evening. That doesn't bring out the verbal participle here, but that would be a sufficient translation as well. So he goes with the 12. We saw this recently too, just a title here, the 12. You may do a capital T in your translation. Would be interesting to see what different translations give you. You're probably going to see, so here's a lowercase t for 12. Let's see what the ESV does. Lowercase t for 12. Some translations will have an uppercase t for 12, really kind of bringing out that it's a title. but that's the 12 disciples. And this maybe is just for further research, but I thought this was interesting. If we're reading the text closely, we remember Jesus has sent ahead 2 disciples. Verse 13, he sent 2 of his disciples. And assuming that these disciples in verse 13, different word here, it's just the word disciples, but assuming that those 2 are 2 of the 12, which I think is a fair assumption, then that leaves the question of what about those 2? Where are they? Did they go back to Jesus? Or did they, I mean, verse 16 makes it sound like they stayed there preparing, they were the forerunners, and now Jesus joins them with the rest of the 12. So the question is, do you bring that out in translation? My answer is I don't think you do. I think you just translate Mark how he has it. Translation always involves interpretation, but personally, I want to be cautious not to over translate. In other words, it may be true that the way to read this is, now when evening came, he went to the room with the remaining 10 of the 12, but I would not put that in translation. It is also possible, and we just don't know, that these 2 did come back and Mark just doesn't record it, so they all go together. It's also possible Mark's just looking at the 12 in general and isn't too concerned with the fact that 2 went ahead. SIL Exegetical Summary Series, which I often reference here, has some interesting options to explain this. But however you understand this, and again, I don't think Mark is crystal clear, but I think what I would do is just translate this, the 12, and then, you know, as you're discussing this with others or studying further on your own, maybe just be prepared with that question. And regardless of whether the 2 stayed or came back, or how Mark is using the 12, whether he's being exact or not, he is focusing the narrative on Jesus and the 12 now. So if the question is, as we often ask, as I often ask, as a philosophy professor taught me to ask, what's the author doing now? What's the author doing now? What's the author doing now? Well, now what the author's doing is giving us a time, giving us a location, so we get a scene, and then we get the characters, all in just a very few words. So this short sentence is doing a lot of work for the narrative, and it's focusing us in now on this important scene that we come to in verse 18. So let me pause there and see what questions or comments you have, either about any of the verses from last time or verse 17 today. I'll keep checking for questions and comments. They're welcome at any time. Let's move on to verse 18. So they're in the room. It's Jesus and the 12. Let me get just the Greek text open. And I might even, you know, sometimes when I'm reading the Greek, it could be useful, you know, read the whole paragraph all at once to get a sense of it. But then when I do more bit by bit, kind of dissecting, I might go to set text pane display. And I've got the text showing as paragraph with space, but I'm going to do separate verses with the space. And then it looks like this. It just gives me a little bit more room and helps me focus more on the verse at hand. I might even blow up the font really big like this. That's up to you, of course, but let's do it that way for the rest of this. Kai anakemenon auton, kai estianton, ha Jesus epen. Amen lego humin, patihes ex humon, paradose me, ha estion met emu. Let's go left to right and see what is happening there. It would be, and they were reclining at the table and eating. Now we get a nominative, a subject, and this was a genitive, so we need to think about this as when. Now when, it's a genitive absolute again. So we've got now when they were reclining, or as they were reclining and eating, Jesus, so here's the subject, Jesus said, truly I say to you that one of you all, that's plural, one of y'all will betray me, the one who eats with me. Here's how I've translated it. And when they were reclining at the table and eating, Jesus said, truly I tell you that one of you will betray me. double dash or M dash, the one who eats with me. Again, we've got the genitive absolute, so everything I said about the genitive absolute in verse 17 holds here. We would not be surprised to go to our diagrams and see in brackets again this, and again it comes off the main verb here, ha Jesus epein. The main sentence of this verse is Jesus said, and there's the content of what he said, but what modifies that is something else about the setting. He said this as they were reclining at the table and eating. So we've got the own. It matches. I underlined these here in the handout. Again, matches in gender, number, and case. We've got participle. Here's our subject. It's a pronoun in this case, and we've got another participle here. So another genitive absolute, this one being a compound. Again, when is probably the best way to translate that. So when they were reclining at the table and eating, comma, Jesus said. And now you're ready for the, grammatically speaking, the main part of the sentence, which again, Jesus said is the grammar of it boiled down to its most essential, just a subject there and a predicate. But there is content here. He says something, so let's continue on and see what that was. He says, truly I tell you that one of you will betray me, the one who eats with me. Amen lego humin hati, truly I tell you that. Now hati can have a range of meaning. In the context of speech, we've seen before that you could understand it as a quotation mark. So he said that, quote, one of you will betray me. I mean, he's already speaking, so that's not what's at play here. But you could also understand it as indirect discourse. He said that one of them would betray him. Then we don't use quotation marks. Here, he's already speaking. We've got epein, truly I tell you that one of you will betray me. You could just translate it that way as I have here. I think you could also understand the hati as a colon. Remember that we don't have punctuation in Greek. We have it in our NA 28, but we don't have it in the manuscripts. And so just as hati could be a quotation mark in certain cases, I think here a colon would be an appropriate way to translate it, because the colon does a lot of work. Hati here is preceding the content of what Jesus tells them. And we have words for that in English, like that. We also have a punctuation mark. So you could do this as, truly I tell you, colon, one of you will betray me. The hati there, as much as it's a word, it's also just an indicator of the thing that Jesus is going to tell them. So that's one of the many minor decisions we make in translation. I don't think it doesn't affect the meaning at all of your translation, which way you go on this, but I did want to raise the options there for you and mention them. Let's talk about betray in just a moment, but I see some questions in the chat, so I want to respond to those. Somebody says, let me put this in the chat. Somebody says, verse 17, the room, are you assuming, or do you have any evidence about the room? Well, I put that in brackets simply because it's not in the Greek text. And I think, as I said, I want to be careful not to over translate. And so I think the reason for that is, the reason I would even put that in brackets is that erkomai tends to imply, at least in English, some kind of place where you're coming or going. But you'll notice here the NET does the same kind of thing. They actually say to the house, but they note, and I appreciate this. I mean, I think if I were to put this outside of brackets in my surface text, I would want to include a note like they have done and say it's not in the Greek text, but it's supplied for clarity. In terms of where are they actually coming in verse 17, we don't know for sure. I mean, if you're coming to the room, you're also coming to the house. If you're coming to the house, you're going to come to the room. The room is all mentioned in the previous passage. That's where they're going. It's right here, a large room upstairs. Get it ready, they're getting it ready, and now they're going there. So they're going to the room, they're at the table in the room. So that much is clear. But I think the question is, how much do you bring that out or not in verse 17? Yeah, here's a great comment, and we'll do this now too. Somebody says the Accordance text browser shows an easy way to overview the different Bible translations. So if you go to live click, that gear icon will show up. Make sure verse lookup is selected. Click OK. Click on your verse reference. And here's the Berean, here's the Common English Bible, here's the CSB, and so those all have a capitalized T. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. That is a quick way to compare. And you might even do this. This is a good way to check after you've done a verse or a passage. Just go look at all the translations and see how it goes. You'll see some of the different translation philosophies and even the minor stuff here. Like, do you capitalize 12 or not? Well, doesn't matter at all for interpretation, I don't think, but you do have some differences there. So it's just worth seeing what other people do with different translations. Yes, this is an interesting point. Someone says at the table is also in addition to the text. Yeah, let's go back to that. So the question would be, if this verb, and actually I've got it here. I didn't. I skipped this, but anakhemai per BDAG can mean recline in general, or it can specifically mean reclining at the table. So if we take that as the word's meaning, we would be translating it straight up. Anakemenon would be translated as reclining at the table. But the way to decide on that, and you know, any two or three of us may make different decisions on that, but the way to do that would be to look at the context. They are at a table. Do we have other? Well, there's the sharing of the meal, there's the room, so they're at a table. But the question would really be about this verb, and we didn't go over that, but I might just triple click this. Oops, got to turn off live click. I'll triple click it to get it in BDAG, which is my default lexicon. And they note that it can mean just lie or recline. So in general, otherwise, always of reclining at table equals dine, which is interesting. But they talk about, well, they even give us as he was dining in the house, which is interesting. That's not mentioned in the table at all. So yeah, you may wish to put that in brackets as well, or a note like this. First century Middle Eastern meals were not eaten while sitting at a table, but while reclining on one side on the floor with the head closest to the low table and the feet farthest away. Yeah, so maybe a better translation is just while they were reclining. And then, you know, if your goal was to be a little bit more colloquial, you might even have something like after they had eaten or something like that. But yeah, thanks for mentioning that. So I think many translations will actually render this verb as, quote, reclining at table, end quote. And they'll say that that table is actually kind of encoded in the verb. But we can see here with BDAG that it could be or it could not be. BDAG thinks it is, but that's also an interpretation. What you could do is look at all the uses of this and kind of make up your mind based on context what you think is the most appropriate translation here. All right, big announcement from Jesus. Truly, I tell you, listen up, focus on this, that one of you will betray me. And again, I've mentioned this before. It's just worth asking about this. Truly, I tell you. The King James gives us verily, verily, I say unto you. You know, it's not like Jesus has to clarify his true statements over against his false statements, because he doesn't make false statements. I mean, I know that's a theological statement, but I think Mark presents it that way too. So it is a funny thing to think about. I'm telling you the truth. So the question might be, well, why is Jesus doing that? It's not because sometimes he tells the truth and other times he doesn't. It's because probably, maybe he's about to say something they don't believe. Maybe he just wants to focus their hearing on what he's about to say. So you could translate this as something like listen up, or get this, or you know, real talk, colon. Again, that would depend on your translation philosophy. I've just gone with the rather bland, truly I tell you, which may be sufficient for you, but it is worth asking, well, why this truly here when everything he says is true? And I think there is some kind of focus on this thing that is, in fact, going to be unbelievable to them. We'll see that in verse 19. Surely not I, or just not I. All right, so truly I tell you that one of you will betray me, paradidomai. We saw this word twice already in this passage. It was early on. You will betray me. Mark 10, verse, I think this was verse, let me just, oh, that should say Mark 14:10. Sorry about that. I'll correct that. Here are my notes from Mark 14:10. I've had this there, but it's the same meaning here. Paradidomai can have to do with giving over, handing over, passing on, whether positive or negative. So the word by itself, before it's put into any context, you could use it in a context where you're giving somebody something, like you know, would you hand me the grocery bag and I'll take it in for you? Would you hand it over to me? And there's nothing negative about that necessarily. But it could be something negative to hand a person over. And we talked about this before, but BDAG here gives us hand over, turn over, give up a person. And that's the context here. There's more in verse 14:10, but we looked at that a few weeks ago. But it's the same meaning here, which has already been established earlier in the passage. Let's just scroll up and look at that. We'll do that in English. Judas Iscariot went to betray Jesus. Paradidomai, they were delighted, promised to give him money. He began to look for an opportunity to paradidomai, to betray him. And now Jesus is predicting that. So in this case, we're looking specifically at the handing over of an individual to an enemy who will presumably take undue advantage of the victim. That's from Lowe and Nida. I don't think there are many better words than betray here. So in terms of translation, you could certainly say, one of you will hand me over. But I think this is one of those passages and one of those events that's so well established and so often talked of as a betrayal, and Judas even named as the betrayer, that I think that's just a pretty good standard translation. Again, with the live click, we could see what other translations do, but so that's all to say, you don't have to say betray per se. It could be hand over, but you've got betray, 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 betray. I mean, most of these, I'd be curious to see if any translation, I'm sure somewhere has something other than, yeah, here's the LSV. That is the literal standard version. Okay, one of you will deliver me up. All right, so that's an option there, but I think betray makes sense here. So he makes the prediction, and the prediction is interesting. The wording is interesting. I'll just share this and then we'll pause again for comments, questions. Look at the wording, how Jesus says this. I'll go to accordance, verse 18. I say to you that, or colon, however you want to do that, one of you will betray me. That's easy enough. And then you get ha, so that's a nominative. Estion, that's a participle. So we've got a participle functioning as a subject, the one who eats with me. So left to right, you've got one of you will betray me, the one who eats with me. Now, we would need punctuation in English. So it would be something like one of you will betray me. You could do an em dash again. You could do a colon. Actually, maybe a comma might be better here. One of you will betray me, comma, and implied, that is to say, the one who eats with me. However, that's not the only way to translate this. And I've just put in here in the SIL Exegetical Summary Series some of the other options here. You could, for example, understand this ha estion met emu as modifying haste, in which case you would translate it as the NET does here, one of you who eats with me will betray me. One of you eating with me will betray me. And of course, they've got a note here. Actually, they don't note that. They just understand this ha estion met emu as a forward adjective modifying haste, one. The diagrams give us not that. So they, with one of you, don't think this is modifying. They take it as being an apposition, which would be how I've done it, like a comma. One of you will betray me, or a dash, or maybe a comma is better, the one who eats with me. It still raises questions. Well, there's not just one eating with you, Jesus. What do you mean? You know, I think implied here is one of the ones who eats with me. We're going to get more on this in verse 19, so he's going to clarify. But this, I think, maybe left to right is the way to go here, and you just leave it like this. But I did notice that the NET took this as an adjective and just kind of lumped it together, one of you eating with me. But I do think this apposition here, this equal sign, is how it's symbolized in the diagrams. That makes sense. And that also, you know, if Jesus was trying to bring out some emphasis or focus with I tell you the truth, phrasing it this way does that too. Truly, I tell you that one of you will betray me. And you can kind of, you know, if there's a pause there, which maybe there's not, but you can imagine some immediate shock. And then they're thinking who? And he says, the one who eats with me. So personally, I favor, if you can preserve the cadence of the Greek, do it. If it makes sense in English, I think it makes perfect sense in English, and it aligns very nicely with Greek here. So we're actually, I think, able to do everything all at once in terms of fidelity to Greek, bringing out the tone and emphasis of it, and then also something that's readable in English. We would use a sentence like this. Truly, I tell you that one of you will betray me, the one who eats with me. That makes perfect sense to me. So maybe think through that as you're translating. And again, you can compare translations, but I see where the NET is coming from. That's not how I translated. I think this with the diagrams makes sense, but you may have some thoughts on that as well. I put the SIL exegetical summary series here, talking about the identity, but we'll get to that in just a minute. Let's just pause there because I want to hear from you and see comments or questions on verse 18. We didn't necessarily cover every word in depth, but mostly wanted to highlight that compound genitive absolute. We talked about this reclining word, talked about the truly I tell you, multiple options for that. And then the meat of what Jesus says, the heart of what he says, one of you will betray me, the one who eats with me. Yes, here's a thank you. This comment came in a little earlier, back to reclining. Someone says it's also part of the Passover tradition to recline while eating the Seder. Thank you for that. Oh, yes, another question. What translation used hand me over? Yeah, no, it's not the Legacy Standard Bible, which is what I thought it was at first. It's the LSV, the Literal Standard Version. Let me pull that up again. Let me give you some more information about that. Covenant Press of the Covenant Christian Coalition 2020. I don't know much about this translation, except that, I mean, this would be a good one to use in translation because they tell you what their goal is in the title. So, but I don't think, if anyone knows of a translation that has something over other than betray, I'd be curious to know. This is the NIRV. I don't know if you all know this translation. It's the New International Reader's Version, and it's based on the NIV, but and you can look all this stuff up, but you can see where different translations have like a reading level that they're geared at. So, and they have a number. So it's like this is geared at a 6th grade reading level, or this one is pitched a little lower, the NIRV. It's meant to be highly readable by folks at all degrees of literacy. And so I don't know what grade it's pitched at, but this one of you will hand me over is kind of interesting. Maybe they thought betray was, you know, too big a word for the reading level they're going for. But otherwise, yeah, pretty universal here. We've got, yeah, Eugene Peterson, God rest his soul, hand me over to the conspirators. I mean, he's going for the meaning, and obviously he's working from the languages, but that brings out a little bit more, uses more words than I might use. All right, let's move on to verse 19, unless I've missed any comments or questions. I think we're up to date, but let me just double check. And if you've got a comment or question, feel free to ask. Okay, so Jesus has made a pretty big claim. And you can see that by their reaction. Short verse here. Let me just clean up this workspace a little bit. All right, let's go back to verse 19. Ersanta lupesthai kai legen auto heis kata heis meti ego, and left to right we've got they began to be distressed, or to be stressed out, or to get worked up, or to be sorrowful. Lots of English words for this. They began to be distressed and to say to him one by one. We'll unpack this phrase. Not I, question mark. They began to be distressed and say to him one by one, not I. We'll talk about punctuation in just a moment, but let's begin with, well, the beginning. Ersanta, they began. That's an aorist. It's a snapshot of this particular point in time. Their distress is not a point in time, it's extended, but we're just looking at the beginning of this. That's why Ersanta, the beginning, is an aorist. And it takes a complementary infinitive. That's just an infinitive that finishes or completes a verbal construction and a thought, just like in English. If I say somebody began, I mean, you could just end it that way, they began, and if you were talking about something in context, you might know what that was, but typically when you've got began, you need something to complete it. So in that case, in this case, we've got began to be distressed, infinitive, and to say, infinitive. That's a complementary infinitive. It's actually compound here because they're doing two things here. Lupesthai kai legen. Lupesthai is from lupeo. We can take a look at this in BDAG. I just put SIL, exegetical summary series, in your notes so that you've got it, but you can see even here, sorrowful, to be sad, to be saddened, to be very sad, to feel hurt, to be grieved. It's a nice, robust word because that implies sadness, but also some kind of dysregulation, maybe. Distressed certainly speaks to dysregulation. Greatly distressed, I don't think that's over translating. I mean, maybe you don't want to put greatly in there if the Greek word megas is not in there per se, but to be upset, this verb can mean to be sad because of what has happened or what one has done or what one might do. So again, we have a remarkable range of words in English for how we might translate this. But what I might do here is triple click this to see it in BDAG. I gotta turn off my live click for triple click to work. Yeah, we've got cause severe mental or emotional distress, to experience sadness or distress. They put Mark 14:19 under sad, distressed, grieve. We saw that there. You could even do live click and look this up in all of your lexicons all at once with a single click. It would also be worth, this is kind of an abbreviated way to do a word study, to search for the lexeme and then add a range and look at this word in Mark. I might just add an English translation here. So we've got one other time this is used. The context is a little bit different, but maybe I would just go with distressed and call it a day on that. But do know that there's a lot that's wrapped up in that. Even the one English word distress means a lot. And out of that place, they said to him one by one, not I. So heis kata eis, one by one. Now let's look at this. I got tripped up on this and I was able to understand why. So heis kata heis. Now, hovering over this, we get masculine singular nominative, one. Kata is a preposition, either a genitive or an accusative follows it, and its meaning adjusts accordingly. So we get against with the genitive, according to with the accusative, and then we have heis again. Now, interestingly, Accordance says masculine singular nominative, but a nominative does not follow kata. So you've got one by one. Why is it this way? The first heis is nominative, the second one is sure looks like a nominative, not expected. Here's Zerwick. We don't have this grammar in accordance, but here's Zerwick's Greek grammar. And I thought this was really interesting. He says only the first 4 of the numerals 1 through 100 are declinable. In other words, you would inflect them according to case. So this second hase should be inflected as an accusative and therefore spelled differently. Only the first 4 of the numerals, Zerwick says, can do that. But because of that, he says, there is a tendency to use even these 4 indeclinably. That is to say, hase just doesn't get declined. It doesn't change spelling according to case. So in that case, no pun intended, in this case, this second hase would actually be an accusative spelled as a nominative. And following kata, accusative gives us according to or by. So you get something like 1 according to 1. If you look at your diagram tool here, you'll see here that the first hase it has the kata coming off it, but the second hase going with the kata, as you would expect with a prepositional phrase. So if your question is, as my question was, why am I getting a nominative after a kata here? I understood the first nominative, why the second one? I think Zerwick's explanation is helpful. Zerwick gives some other uses of this formula. In fact, what you could even do yourself is take this phrase, right click. You could do 2 things. You could search for inflected, which is going to show you any other time that this phrase, 1 by 1, is inflected with 2 essentially nominative hases, and it's just here in Mark. You could look this up in the Septuagint too, just to be thorough. I'll go for search in the Septuagint. But you could also search for the Lexeme, which will then give you more uses. Here's Mark 14:19, what we expected. Here's John 8:9, and we actually have the same thing here. And it just showed this up because Kot was abbreviated as Koth. So we've got the same thing in John. Revelation, on the other hand, we have hase inflected as hen. So it is inflected as the accusative here. So Zerwick points that out and says, here's what you might have expected. Here's an example of it in Revelation 4:8. Mark has it this way. Here's why. Looks like John has it that way too. But the translation is 1 by 1. Maybe an arcane point grammatically, but I thought it was interesting, and I had to puzzle over it, so I thought I would share that with you. All right, last little piece on this verse, and then we'll check in again, questions and comments. Meti ego, I think not I, question mark, is sufficient. You've got the semicolon there. Of course, it's the editors of the critical text that have put that in. That's not in the manuscripts, but not I, question mark. Colloquially, we would say not me, but what is implied in English and in Greek is not I who will betray you, I will betray you. So you wouldn't say me will betray you. So not me is grammatically not correct in English. However, if your goal is conversational English, people say that all the time. So you could do that. That might bother you, in which case just translate it not I. Ego here is in the nominative. So both in Greek and English, we use a nominative or a subject pronoun there, not I. This is a good example, I think, of an incomplete sentence in Greek that I would not tease out, even with brackets. So whereas we had some examples before where they found just as Jesus said, well, we kind of need to fill that in for it to make sense in English. Not I makes sense in English. We would use a phrase like that. So in other words, I would not put even brackets here to say, not I will betray you, or I won't betray you, will I? Even though that's what they're asking. I don't know that we've talked about the interrobang in this session before, but and I don't know if you've seen this, but it looks kind of funny. This is not a typo, but it's basically an exclamation mark with a question mark on top of it. Oxford defines this as a non-standard punctuation mark indicating a question expressed in an exclamatory manner, as in, what are you doing? And I think this is exactly, I think, what the disciples are doing. They are asking a question, but in an exclamatory manner. Now, I think it's pretty non-standard too for translations to do question mark, exclamation mark, question mark, certainly the interrobang. But if you're just doing this for yourself or people to whom you're going to explain this, if your typographer permits it, or if you can figure out how to enter it on your keyboard, it's maybe the first challenge. This, I think, would be a great place for that, as long as it makes sense, and it may not make sense to your people reading it. So maybe you just make a note of it. But this, I think, in terms of what the interrobang is, I think it captures perfectly the essence of this question. I think they are maybe asking for clarification, like they want to know, is it I? But it's in the context of this distress. Notice that the say is parallel to the distress. They're both complementary infinitives. So they're saying in distress. They're saying out of their distress, not I. So some kind of emphasis there, I think, is appropriate. Personally, I think not I with a question mark is fine, but in my own translation, I would want to bring out the intensity of this question more if possible. So the interrobang is one way to do that, or just a footnote is another way to do that. That's verse 19. Let's stop there and see comments or questions that you've got. Here's a great question. Sorry, this is the comment. Somebody says middle voice infinitive right here. Yep. Accurately points to each of the 12 self-centered feelings. They were not exactly grieving for Jesus. Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Right. Yep, that's right. And I mean, just to kind of prove that, I mean, you've got ego. I mean, that literally is a self-focused word. It's I. So yeah, that middle voice there, yeah, kind of brings out almost like a reflexive distress or grieving. They certainly are focused on themselves. How did you type the interrobang into the handout? That's a really good question. I actually copied and pasted it in, and I knew at one time how to do this, but I've since forgotten. So if somebody knows and wants to put it in the chat, or just type it in the search engine, there's probably some keyboard shortcut I'm not aware of, but I just copy and pasted it in. And again, if we were publishing a translation, this would be a question for the publisher. Like, do we use interrobangs in any of our stuff? And maybe no, maybe yes. But yeah, I think for our own individual translations, I think something like that would make a lot of sense. All right, another couple comments. Let me just put these. Oh, interesting. Yeah, so this is back to the reclining. Someone's got Josephus here being laid up in the temple. Yeah, and you'll see in BDAG, I put that in the chat, but BDAG will give you, oh, maybe it doesn't have Josephus here. It will, but it will give you other literature besides the New Testament. Well, yeah, here's Josephus mentioned here. Yeah, great, thank you. So yeah, I mean, as part of a broader word study, I mean, you really could broaden out. I would go, the way I would do it is passage first, then the book next, to see what clarity I can get. Does Mark have a unique way or a consistent way to use this word? Then I go New Testament, I go Septuagint, and then yeah, you've got other contemporaneous and nearby Greek literature that you could look at. Thanks for mentioning that. All right, let's do verse 20. Not I, they all say. And then, ha de epenautois, haeston dodica, ha embaptamenas metemu, eis ta triblion. Left to right, we get something like and or but, he, so there's ha for just he as a subject. He said to them, one of the 12, the one who dips with me into the bowl or the dish. And that's it. Again, we've got a possible ellipsis here, something left out or implied. And as with other verses, we decide how we're going to handle that. Here's what I've offered as at least a provisional translation. Then he said to them, implied, it is one of the 12, the one who dips his bread or hand, also in parentheses, into the bowl with me. And just again, to reiterate, if I were publishing this, or even sometimes I'll translate and put it in our church bulletin. I do not in that case do brackets or parentheses. I think for readers that can be distracting. This is just so we can kind of see the closeness to the text. But it is not included here in Greek. Jesus is just beginning his speech with one of the 12. So it reads and sounds like, then he said to them, one of the 12, the one who dips into the bowl with me. So that is up to the translator to either supply or not supply. It is or it will be. When you look at your Greek diagrams, they are great about this because whatever you decide you want to do in translation, you can at least see the logic of this and grammatically how it works. You've got one of the 12, but here that's lacking a subject and a verb. Well, this whole diagram is built around a subject at left and a predicate or a verb at right. And so they need something here for the diagrams to work. And so you've got this key, which is looks like an X. It's a null subject. So that's your way of seeing there's no actual subject in the Greek. And the estin is in parentheses. The diagrams, again, being very careful to show that's not actually in the Greek per se, just you've got one of the 12. But again, that's for you as a translator to decide how you want to deal with that. It is interesting to wonder, and I just raised this as a question, why does Jesus say one of the 12 and not one of you? I would not over-translate here and change it to one of you, even if he's talking to them and looking at them, and even if this is the right meaning. He is saying one of the 12, so I would just bring that right over into translation, but it is worth asking. That's not probably the typical way that a person addressing 12 people would refer to them. So it's just worth asking. And again, not a translation decision. I think it's the 12. No questions asked in terms of translation, but it is interesting. Is he trying to distance himself from them? Is he trying to soften the blow? Is he trying to gradually get there? Regardless, he does clarify the one, not the one of you. Again, it's that same posture here, and kind of keeping it third person, but ha embaptamenos, the one who dips into the bowl with me. Once again, embaptamenos from embapto, you can see this idea of baptizing here, the dipping or immersing. No direct object specified here. If you think it works in English without a direct object, don't put one in English. I don't think it does, so I think you need some object here. The one who dips his bread or his food or dips his hand into the bowl with me. Translations will vary on this. So I guess the question is how much do you want to clarify that makes sense, that again is not over translating it. So hand, I think, is less specific than bread. Maybe it's another food. So maybe you say dips his hand into the bowl with me. And you could do some background research on this. I think this will get into the kind of meal they were eating, and as someone mentioned at the Seder dinner, the reclining. Okay, well, what gets dipped at the Seder dinner? And you've got here SIL Exegetical Summary Series, just in general from Anchored Bible, dipping food in bowls of sauces and relishes was a common feature of meals. And then we've got here from Lane's commentary, this probably refers to dipping bread and bitter herbs into a bowl of stewed fruit on the table. I would do further research on this and then translate it as broadly as possible so that my translation is not making a decision that isn't totally defensible. So I think bread is defensible, but it's not necessarily bread. So I might just say, in the end, the one who dips his hand into the bowl with me. And I mentioned the NASB and how they give you those not in the Greek text words in italics. So you'll see some of that here, but we've got dipping his hand. Here's the ASV. Interestingly, we've got, and he said unto them, it is, see how that's in italics there? Because that's not in Greek, one of the 12, he that dippeth with me in the dish. So they don't bring out an object, so they are translating the Greek straight up. I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense in 2025, so I would not translate it that way, but you can see why they did. I mean, looking at the Greek, in that sense, the translation makes sense. Yeah, you've got dips with me is that King James family of translations. Even the ESV, which tends to be more on the word for word side, gives us bread here, even if the word bread is not mentioned. Let's just briefly cover verse 21, and then I'll leave the last bit of time for questions. And we may pick up again with 21 next time, but let's look at this last verse here, because here's kind of the payoff to everything. So we've got, and I'm going to leave the diagram open for just a moment. Hati hamen huias tu anthropu hupage kathos gegraptai periautu. Uai de to anthropo ekeno di hu hahuias tu anthropu paradidotai. There's that betray word again. Kalan auto euk egenethe ha anthropos ekenas. Let me just briefly note the big picture of this verse is 3 words, but there's 1 word in a set of 2 words. The first one is hati. Think of this sentence as governed by this first hati. It's for the Son of Man will go. This is a grounding clause, and it's seeking to explain what comes before it, that namely the one who dips his hand or bread or however you go with that into the bowl with me. It's explaining that hati for. So that's the main governing word of this sentence. And then you've got this extended men day, and you can see men here, which comes in between ha huias, and that's because this is what's called a post-positive word, so it comes in second position in the sentence, but the title still is ha huias tu anthropu, the Son of Man. But men is kind of like on the one hand, and then where there's a men, you can look for a day, and it comes later here. But it's on the one hand, on the other hand. And the full translation of that would be, for on the one hand, the Son of Man will go just as it is written about him, but on the other hand, woe to that person. And so Jesus is saying, yeah, on the one hand, this has been prophesied, this has been written about, so it needs to happen is the implication. But still, woe to the person that brought it about. That's what Men Day is indicating. More important than this exact language is just to show the contrast. And that may be as simple as the first men goes untranslated and the day comes out with but. You can see in the diagrams though, the men day right here and then what comes after it. So here's the, on the one hand, the Son of Man will go as it is written about him. On the other hand, woe to the one who betrays him. That's the men day there. And let me just note in closing, I know we're at time and I want to make sure I answer questions. I'll just raise this point here. Hupage is an interesting word, and I've not done much with it in translation, except to just say, for the Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. And that may be fine for a final translation. But the BDAG says it's a euphemism for take the journey of death, die. And so I think whether you pull that out in translation or not, understanding that that's what he's saying, I think is important. But you may wish to just leave the translation will go. Again, you can compare. There's more to unpack here that we haven't done, but it comes back to this verse again. We get paradidomai once more, betrayed. You can think of this word even as bookends of this passages because it's in verse 10 and it's in verse 21. We are surely expecting it now. Jesus has prophesied it, and also we've seen the behind the scenes stuff with Judas, and now this person gets woe ascribed or assigned to them And so this is some level of suspense here. Mark is not telling us in this story anything about the dipping of the bread, who's doing it or describing it, but we do know who it is from earlier in the passage. We know it's Judas. So we're maybe left a little bit on the edge of our seat. We know who's going to do it. We don't know exactly when. This verse really gives a lot of meaning to this passage. So we will come back to this next time. I'll spend some more time on this verse at the beginning because I think this does tie into some other themes of the book that are worth raising more. I see one more typo here. I will correct the 2 typos I've seen in this handout. I will ask Linda to email the corrected version to you who are here live. If you are watching this on a recording, by the time you're watching this, it will be a corrected handout that's uploaded here. So about 10 minutes after the ending of this live webinar, I'll put that up there. Let's see last questions or comments you've got, and then we'll wrap up. And of course, if you need to go, you can, and you'll get the rest of this. I'm still recording. Somebody asked, doesn't the fact Jesus instructed his disciples to prepare the Passover during the Feast of Unleavened Bread determine that the references to food and dipping in this passage find its meaning from the Passover ceremony and not the common meal of the day? Yes, exactly. Thank you. And as I was reading that, I wondered about that too. Right. So this explanatory comment from Anchor, and I'd be curious to see it in context. We're just getting a snippet here, but yeah, I mean, okay, great, good to know. It's a common feature of meals. Maybe that's helpful background anyway. This is not just any meal. And even here, the NICT, I'd be curious in context whether they're talking more specifically. I bet they are. We haven't really looked at commentaries much this passage, but yeah, that's a great point then. So understanding that context and which meal this is, that does narrow it down. So is there bread at the Passover meal? If no, I mean, I think the answer is yes, but if no, you would not put bread in translation. So that's a great way to clarify this word that we otherwise are trying to figure out what's the object of it. Go with what's actually happening at the meal. So yeah, thank you for that. And you're right, it's exactly, you know, we don't just get this from commentaries. We get it from the text itself. All right. This is funny. All right, let me just put this in the chat. Somebody said in Bob Tomino, sprinkled or immersed. LOL. Very good. Yeah, I guess it depends on how much how saturated with the dip you want your food to be. Yeah, somebody says, but you dip vegetables at Passover. Yeah, this would probably be a good verse, and just being mindful of time here. I would open up an info pane on this. We just did a session on that Wednesday, and I would get in and out of some commentaries and see what I can get here. I'd also look at the different translations and see if there's any way that bread could be defended at the Passover meal. And if not, and if it's only vegetables, maybe you can maybe even translate it that way. But yeah, this is something that's worth taking some more time on, I think, especially because we don't have the object here. So that's why, you know, it's not just background research, it's also something needed for translation. I don't know that you've got vegetables in any translation. I've only seen just dips in general, dips his hand, dips his bread. I don't think I even saw dips his food. That would be a safer translation if you weren't sure. Yeah, so interesting. So I would look through that and see what you can find, but thanks for mentioning that. All right, thanks so much for being here, everyone. I know we've gone late, but it's good to be with you. I really appreciate the good interaction. I'm gonna end the recording and stay on for just one more moment. So if you are watching the recording, here is the handout to be corrected by the time you click on it, tinyurl.com/marktranslationnotes. You can email me at abramkj@accordancebible.com.